This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace includes easy-to-use tools that allow you to make your own dream website. And by going to the link in the description, squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis, and using code NintendoBlackCrisis, you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Having your own personalized website can be extremely useful whether you're a business or artist, since it lets you have a virtual gallery where you can post work for the world to see. In my case, my website is closely tied to my main channel on YouTube. It lets me advertise some of my more interesting content, allows people to submit video suggestions, and talk about some of the less relevant things like our Zelda-themed Minecraft server and Archive64, a secondary channel that provides high-quality, commentary-free gameplay footage for use in video editing. It's amazing what you can do in Squarespace just by dragging and dropping text and images. And if you really want to, it's also possible to add videos, monetize content with paid areas, and connect social media accounts so that those posts appear on your website. Even if you're not sure where to start, Squarespace allows you to choose from pre-made templates, which you can later adjust to fit with whatever it is you want to do. So make sure to click the link in the description and use code NintendoBlackCrisis to save 10% off your first purchase. That's squarespace.com/NintendoBlackCrisis. Back in a 2019 interview regarding the sequel to Breath of the Wild, now called Tears of the Kingdom, Onuma stated that the game was originally intended to be DLC for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. However, once realizing how many ideas they had, it eventually turned into its own game. Since then, many have pointed out the similarities between concept art for the first game to trailers of Tears of the Kingdom. A few examples include a picture of Link's right hand transforming into a number of different tools, such as a hammer and beetle launcher, as well as this shot of Ganondorf standing atop a floating mountain. In both cases, these can be compared to shots of Tears of the Kingdom, the first being Link's right hand used to activate a stasis-like ability, presumably due to the powers of the green hand, as well as the numerous floating islands in the 2021 trailer, alongside Hyrule Castle itself. In addition, there's some concept art of Link riding a motorcycle found in Creating a Champion, a vehicle which made an appearance in the Champion's Ballad DLC. With this in mind, it's possible that more of these unused concepts and ideas will be implemented into Breath of the Wild sequel. In today's video, we're going to look at some of these scrapped concepts, whether it be character or gameplay related. In a previous episode where I went over 40 different mini-theories on Tears of the Kingdom, I brought up the possibility of the vial-like objects on Link's waist being connected to his hand abilities. Perhaps we start off with a few of them, each providing different powers, and throughout the game one of the goals is to collect more of them and expand Link's arsenal of tools and/or weapons. Page 203 of Creating a Champion includes concept art of the Sheikah Slate and its functionality. In one drawing, the player holds it up to a door as a sort of ID to let them through, similar to how it works with the Guidance Stones. Another is of a dragonfly-like tool which acts as a sort of spy. The notes mention an eye or camera that faces down. Perhaps the original plan was for this to give Link a bird's-eye view of the landscape and mark vital locations and/or enemies, kind of like birds in the most recent Assassin's Creed games. On a side note, according to these drawings, it was actually the Sheikah eye part which was going to come out of the slate and act as the camera for the dragonfly. Another drawing is of Link moving blocks via magnetism, with what they refer to as Magnagloves. Likely an early version of the Magnesis rune, with another being pins which, when pulled out of the Sheikah slate, produce bombs similar to the bomb runes. Lastly, there are two pictures of vial-like objects filled with liquid ancient energy. One of these shows it being injected into something, similar to a syringe. Perhaps this concept will return in Tears of the Kingdom. The player injects this fluid into somewhere to activate different powers. When you look at some of the trailer footage, there seems to be a big open circle in the center of the arm bracing. Could the purpose of this spot be holding the vials, which are also circular in shape? Honestly, it's hard to say, especially since we have this life-size statue of Link where rather than a hole, there's a symbol. Going back to one of the previous images, Link's right hand is replaced with some sort of technology capable of transforming into several tools. A bow, hammer, and hookshot-like gadget. There's also one that shoots out bombs and a flying beetle, somewhat similar to the dragonfly. Not only do some of these have a chance at reappearing in Tears of the Kingdom, but perhaps we'll be using similar runes as Breath of the Wild's which have been altered. For example, we don't see stasis in Tears of the Kingdom trailers, but we do see an ability very similar to stasis. So instead of a bombs rune, maybe we'll get a cannon that can shoot out bombs. I also want to briefly mention the Broken Master Sword, since it draws a parallel to what's shown off in the trailer. And while no part of the sword is broken off, part of the logo in Tears of the Kingdom replaces the steel with this green wireframe-like substance that forms the shape of the blade's end. I'm really excited to see the other abilities of Link's hand that will no doubt appear in the game. On the combat side of things, Breath of the Wild kept it rather safe with basic controls, and that in no way is a bad thing. Some of the tricks people have managed to pull off in battling is insane given how simple everything is. It just goes to show how well everything was made. Though it would be cool if sword techniques were to be added, similar to Twilight Princess or Minish Cap. One obscure drawing I found demonstrated a rather interesting concept of Link standing on a sword guard to aim his bow over a barricade. It's a very unique way of using his environment to his advantage, and this also leads into my next bit. Page 246 includes some concept art of Hyrule Castle's dining hall, where they plan to add cobwebs and dust to certain objects as a means of showing the player that these couldn't be picked up. The idea itself is very unique since it sort of acts as a hint towards what can and can't be interacted with. But it also got me thinking about how awesome it would be if players were able to interact more with their surroundings. Why not let them pick up small things such as candlesticks or other environmental objects to use in combat or for other purposes? Breath of the Wild already did a fantastic job with this, letting you detonate explosive barrels, roll boulders down cliffs onto unsuspecting enemies, break platforms the enemies were on, even create elemental explosions by shooting chew jelly. If the Zelda team took this a step further, it may breathe even more life into this world and make the environment feel less static. Moving on to some other interesting stuff, this page includes rough designs of what would become the Master Cycle Zero, and the one on the far right is definitely the most unique. A machine with 3 legs with what I assume are 2 separate modes of transport. The first is likely meant to be a walking version where it literally walks along the surface, but when running, these legs supposedly fold up. So maybe the spherical shaped ball at the bottom would act as a wheel of sorts, allowing you to travel at a much faster pace. It's unlikely that the Sheikah Slate would return in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'm pretty sure the Zelda team would want to have a replacement for the Master Cycle Zero, so maybe we'll end up with a design like this in the final version. This next one is less about unused content and more so a theory I came up with which, if implemented into Tears of the Kingdom, would be pretty cool. Page 79 gives us a look at some designs for Dark Beast Ganon, the second and final phase of the Calamity Ganon boss fight. First off, I love the look of the one on the left, but there's something else I noticed when taking a second glance at this drawing. You can clearly see a ribcage of sorts making up the main body of this form. Some may have noticed during their playthroughs the massive fossils all throughout Breath of the Wild. Most of the time when this topic is brought up, people immediately think of the 3 Leviathans. But there's also others found in places such as the Lanayru and Gerudo Desert regions, the latter consisting of multiple ribcages, ones which share both the size and general shape of the one in the Dark Beast Ganon concept. In fact, this whole thing seems to be a skeletal being. And this isn't simply a case of the Malice taking on the shape of bones. You can see some visible white spots on the tusks and legs, almost as if Malice is covering actual fossils. So maybe the original phase of this fight began with Calamity Ganon's Malice possessing the bones of some long-extinct creature, reanimating it after death similar to the cursed Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos. In fact, this is pretty much what Ganon does with the Blights and his spider-like form. Both were born out of a fusion of Malice and Sheikah technology. And for Tears of the Kingdom, I really want to see this concept of Malice corrupting inanimate objects taken further. How cool would it be to fight some Leviathan-like creature now possessed by Malice? Personally speaking, I think it would be really cool. And now it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about some of the more comical things they could add to the sequel, but probably won't. These next 2 bits should in no way be taken seriously, but I still wanted to address them. One of Link's earliest designs was a guitar-playing, motorcycle-riding version. According to the developers, his guitar was called, wait for it, the Tri-Caster, and it was accompanied with Din's drum, Faror's bass, and Nehru's keyboard. It's funny because in a lot of Zelda games, the whole goal is collecting key items that somehow play a part in defeating Ganon, and musical instruments are a recurring theme in the series. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this was the route the game was going. A game where you'd have to collect the 3 instruments of the goddesses to obtain the power of the TriCaster. As funny as this is, it would be really cool to have a Zelda game set in a more modern day, so perhaps we will see something like this in the future. Second is on page 164. The bottom right has some rough designs of the Cuckoo, a recurring creature in the series. And the bottom set of pictures includes a few rather bizarre images. One of a Cuckoo sitting on Link's head, another of whom we can assume is Link using the Cuckoo as a weapon of sorts. And there's also this person riding one of these birds. I assume that this is Link, but is this an actual Cuckoo, or is it a life-sized flying robot? Apparently the Minish were planned to appear in Breath of the Wild, so maybe this is a Minish-sized Link riding a normal Cuckoo as a means of transportation? Honestly, it's all rather bizarre when you think about it. Next, let's talk about characters. Something I'd love to see is more personality in them, whether it be the monsters, animals, or people. One cool feature in Breath of the Wild was the Wolf Link companion that would follow you around and occasionally fight enemies. But they could have definitely done more with this concept. Moving on to the horses, page 160 has a whole section on, and I quote, "pointless stuff I want the horses to do." These include cheek nuzzling, popping its head through windows when Link is inside of buildings, swaying in time with the music, eating tree branches, and playfully running with Link. As far as I know, only 2 and 3 are actually in the game, so if they were to add some of these others, it would make the overall experience a whole lot more memorable. But this bit of criticism also includes the monsters. In fact, on page 152 there are some rough concepts for the Hinox. It shows them chasing animals, doing somersaults, bathing in water, attacking a cart, and swallowing a cow whole? Okay, that last one is a bit graphic, but the point being that these would make them a lot more interesting. One of the reasons people love the Bokoblins so much, aside from their overall design, is how much character was given to them. They can be hunting, riding horses, dancing around the fire, or sleeping. Now, to be fair, the Hinox do have some interesting quirks. They can pick up trees and throw them at Link, but every time you come across one of them, they're just sleeping. No sort of diversity whatsoever. Adding some character to them, as well as other creatures, would make the world of Hyrule feel a lot more alive. Something that we rarely get to see in the Zelda series is Link's family, and whenever they are brought up, it's either as a side character with little reference to the story, or something that's very briefly mentioned and never seen. In Breath of the Wild's case, we are given some information on Link's father. According to Zelda, he too was a knight serving the royal family. And that's about it. However, in the Japanese version of Creating a Champion, referred to as Masterworks, there are a couple of additional pages in the book, showing Link standing alongside 2 other figures. It's been speculated that this is his family. Now, I highly doubt this is going to reappear in Tears of the Kingdom, since technically they'd be dead by now, which, now that I think about it, is super depressing, but it would be nice to get a bit more backstory on Link and where he comes from. What's by far the most significant change to the game in terms of characters, at least in my personal opinion, comes from page 83. It includes rough concepts of what would become Breath of the Wild's champions. And at the bottom, in place of a Rito champion, is a short figure holding a whip, likely to be a Kokiri. So it seems that originally the 4 champions were to consist of a Goron, Zora, Kokiri, and Gerudo. Prior to Breath of the Wild, the only other game that had the Rito tribe was Wind Waker, so I'm happy that this was changed through development. But this does lead into my next point. Tears of the Kingdom needs to either bring back past races in the series, or introduce us to new ones entirely. We already know that at one time the Zelda team was considering adding the Minish to the game, and if that past drawing was of Link riding a live Cuckoo, them once being in Breath of the Wild would make sense. But as crazy as it might sound, there were also ideas to include aliens in the game. The only other time this has happened in the series is Majora's Mask, and while this idea was ultimately scrapped, the shiekah technology definitely had that futuristic, otherworldly sort of feel. And, of course, I feel obligated to mention the Zonai. We already know that this tribe did exist in Hyrule's past, but to actually see them in-game would be interesting. Another improvement to Breath of the Wild would be more interesting NPCs and side quests. The game does have some memorable characters, such as Cass and Bolson, but every time I go back to Creating a Champion, I'm reminded of this image on page 102. It's of a shiekah woman's spirit, and given what we know, it's very likely that this is Dorian's wife who was killed by the Yiga clan as a response to him cutting ties with the group. You find out about this during the Stolen Heirloom quest, and while it still is a fantastic side quest, it would have been even better if the player could interact with this spirit. In fact, every morning you can find the eldest daughter Coco crying at the graveyard. I wish there was a second part to this quest where we reunite Coco with her mother during the nighttime or something. If Tears of the Kingdom had more of these sorts of quests, with storylines as interesting as this, it would be fantastic. Now, on the topic of quote-unquote interesting characters, one criticism of the first game was the lack of variety when it came to enemies. Not only should Tears of the Kingdom bring back older monsters of the series, but it should also do so while setting that much darker tone as seen in the first trailer. You'd be surprised at just how dark the first game was planned to be given the Guardian concept art on page 204. Never in a million years would you expect this to be rough sketches for a creature in a Zelda game. Great examples of enemies which would fit with this tone are the more eerie ones such as Redeads, Wallmasters, or something akin to Dead Hand. But of course, this is all with the assumption that this game will have a darker tone. For this last portion, I've decided to talk a bit more about unused locations that could make an appearance in Tears of the Kingdom. The weapon breaking system was a hit or miss for most people, and one thing that was nowhere to be seen in Breath of the Wild was a weapon shop or blacksmith to repair weapons. However, pages 308 and 169 of Creating a Champion show that, at one time, these ideas were considered for the game. The first is of a Rito shop that the players would purchase bows from, which can be seen hanging from a top rail. And the latter talks about a concept where Link would find rusted swords in the overworld and take to someone to polish into rare special swords or normal ones. In a way, this concept is still in the final build, though rather than taking these weapons to a blacksmith, they need to be inhaled by rock octoroks. One location that's never seen in-game is Hyrule Castle's Great Hall. There's also this concept art of a restored castle town, and while I really want this to be in the sequel given just how much effort was put into making this drawing in the first place, given what we see in the trailer, it's very unlikely. Now, if you've been watching my past videos, especially ones on the Zonai, you might remember when we discussed the numerous pillars throughout Hyrule. According to Masterworks, these are Zonai related, however their appearance greatly differs from the other architecture of this tribe. In fact, they share patterns often found on Hylian structures. And that's because these pillars underwent massive changes throughout development. Older builds of this game had a much more Zonai-esque design, but it still wasn't nearly as quote-unquote fancy as the ones shown off in Masterworks. My point being, assuming that the Zonai are super relevant to Tears of the Kingdom, I want to see a lot more of these sorts of structures. I just find their architecture so fascinating, and am kind of disappointed that the towers were watered down this much. And to go a bit off topic here, another favorite design of mine in this book are the Divine Beasts. It's almost as if there were cities built into them, giving off a sort of modern look. Lastly, and I know this one isn't nearly as important, but I'd love to see more alternate outfits for both Link and Zelda. There's plenty of different rough concepts in Creating a Champion, and some of them look really nice. And I absolutely love these more casual Zelda clothes. Plus, it feels like this would help strengthen her character. Her entire story revolves around being forced into a position she didn't want to be in, when at the end of the day, she's just a normal girl. Most of her outfits in-game are ones that scream royalty, even though that shouldn't be the thing that defines her character. Sadly, I doubt we'll see any alternate Zelda outfits, but you never know. With all that said, thanks for watching this video. Let me know if there are any other unused concepts you'd love to see in the sequel. It doesn't even need to be cut content, just anything that you feel would make Tears of the Kingdom a good game. I've been NintendoBlackCrisis, and I'll see you all next time.